Recording in progress.
Afternoon, Council, Committee, staff, members of the public, both in attendance and online. Welcome to the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee for Monday, October 3rd, 2022. They'll bring us to order. And with that, I will read in our land acknowledgement. For more than 15,000 years, the First Nations walked upon and cared for the lands we now call home. Anishinaabek, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and many others who are families, friends, and communities the way we are today. The town of Collingwood acknowledges the Lake Simcoe Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818 and the relationship it establishes with the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. We acknowledge the reality of our shared history and the current contributions of Indigenous people within our community. We seek to continue empowering expressions of pride amongst all of the diverse stakeholders in this area. We seek to do better and to continue to recognize, learn, and grow in friendship and community nation to nation. We'll look for an adoption of the agenda, that the content of the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee agenda for October 3rd, 2022 be adopted as presented. I've got Deputy Mayor McLeod and I've got Councillor Doherty. Under, I think, departmental updates, we'll have one addition. Chief Thurman's going to join us, I believe, online with an update at that time. Are there any other questions arising from the minutes? Or sorry, from the agenda, I should say. Seeing none, then I'll call the vote. And that's carried unanimously. For those who are either in attendance or online watching, we do have all members of council present, and Councillor Berman is joining us virtually this afternoon. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest today? Okay, seeing none, if you see one that arises, you know what to do. That takes us to deputations. We do have one that was given to us in advance, and that would be item 4.1. And I believe that we have Greer Campbell joining us. It's in reference to Bill 5, Stopping Harassment and Abuse by Local Leaders Act. And this is in reference to a private member's bill. And if we have Greer with us, we'll invite her to join. Is Greer Campbell there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, welcome. How are you tonight?
I'm very well, thank you. And thank you so much. I'm just trying to start my video here. I don't know. There we are.
Okay.
I don't know if you can see me, but nice to see everyone. And thank you so much for having me this evening. I am here on behalf of the Women of Simcoe Say No, and which is a group of men and women who are in support of Bill 5. And I'm not sure how much everyone knows or understands. I'm sure you're well aware of Bill 5 because it's quite a talk of the town in terms of municipalities. But so I'm here tonight just to speak, say a few words with regard to our supporting and asking your support for Bill 5, Stopping Harassment and Abuse by Local Leaders. It's certainly something that is needed. It's a gap in legislation, and that's why I'm here tonight. So if you could go to the next slide, that'd be excellent. Thank you. Okay, sorry, I'm just going to move my Zoom over so I can actually see it. Just give me a minute here. Okay, for some reason, I've got my screen is not wide enough to see my slide. My apologies, just give me a minute here. There we go. Okay, great. So just a bit of background in terms of the Ontario Private Members Bill 5. The multiple Ontario municipalities have learned the hard way in the last few years about the lack of tools in the Municipal Act. I'm sure we're all very well aware of the situation that has transpired over the last few years in Ottawa with regard to the harassment of the high-profile situation with that councillor. But currently, the Municipal Act does not hold councillors accountable for workplace harassment in a way that, let's say, city employees are held by those same policies. Currently, the most severe penalty that can be imposed on a municipal councillor is a suspension of pay for 90 days. There is no process for removing councillors from office. Next slide, please. So Bill 5, a private member's bill, seeks to address this. The bill will amend the Municipal Act 2001 and the City of Toronto Act 2006. The Stopping of Harassment and Abuse by Local Leaders Act will permit municipalities to direct the Integrity Commissioner to apply to the court to vacate a member's seat for failing to comply with the municipality's workplace violence or harassment policies. We're seeing many examples of harassment, within local municipalities, within councils that are facing these challenges today. Next slide, please. The Ontario Private Members Bill 5, this will help keep workplaces safe. It's accountability through a transparent and fair process that it should exist but doesn't. So our ask for today is for your council to pass a motion to endorse Bill 5 and write a letter of support to be sent to local MPPs, Premier Doug Ford, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and Liberal MPP for Orleans, Stephen Blaise, who is the creator of the Private Members Bill. So that's, in terms of my content, that's really all I want to present. Does anyone have any questions for me?
Right, and bringing the matter forward for this council's consideration. And I just acknowledge that the presentation as it was set up within the agenda, was brought forward by Women of Simcoe Say No. But I think in the preamble, you had mentioned that you have both men and women who are supporting this.
Yes.
Which is encouraging to hear. So thank you for
Yes.
making that note. I will then turn to the table. Is there anyone, I should say, around the table that would have a question specific to the matter? Yes, sir. Councillor Carrier.
Thank you. More a couple of comments than questions. I'm in support of this, actually. As an identified progressive conservative, I do support the Liberal member's private bill on this. I say this in the context of having served on the board of directors of my friend's house for 8 years. It's one of my proudest appointments to sit alongside so many women doing such hard work and dedicated work and committed work for women facing violence at home. Having been an elected politician for over 13 years, I've also witnessed at the table behavior that is unbecoming of members. And when I served from 98 to 2010, we really had no tools to hold each other accountable, or council as a whole to hold a member accountable for their behavior. In 2006, the council of the day, former Councillor Sandberg, former Councillor Jeffrey, former Councillor Chadwick, and myself were asked by then Mayor Geddes to come up with a first code of conduct for the town of Collingwood for council. We did that. While it was laudable in respects back in 2006, it was really a toothless and unenforceable document. Unfortunately, we couldn't hold really with any power or any real action each other accountable. I've witnessed since then this council will go through a revised code of conduct. I've gone through the training on the new code of conduct and the integrity commissioner, and thank goodness we do have the integrity commissioner to do that. Most recently, I'm going to be very cautious as to how I speak to this next section. We had an all candidates debate where a candidate was heckled by the crowd, completely inappropriate. I was very disappointed to not see the moderator step in and ask the crowd to either control themselves or leave. They were not there to participate, they were there to listen. I was disappointed that, and I say this respectfully, that nobody objected as well, any member of the panel there. When we see bullying from either the audience or we see at the table, we should be holding each other to account. If we do not speak up, we do condone bad behavior. I have taken some significant action in the past as a former mayor to hold members of council to the best of my ability to account, including receiving and having legal advice to the council of the day of aggressive and unbecoming behavior of a member of council towards staff to try and insulate and protect that staff person from bad behavior. I am 100% wholly supportive of moving this forward, and I would be happy and proud to vote when it comes back at a certain date to support it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carrier. Is there anyone else around the table that would like to offer comment or question? Councillor Hamlin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also am fully in support of the recommendation here to bring a motion in support of Bill 5 and send letters of support as well. And I'm happy to move that when the time comes. I have a few questions. I'm wondering, I know that you're, through you, Mr. Mayor, I know that you're visiting various municipalities. How many have you visited so far, and what kind of response are you getting from the councils?
Is that a question for me? Sorry. Yes. Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's a really great question. It's been very interesting. Generally speaking, most of the councils have been very open to having us. I was honestly, my email to the clerk for Collingwood was the most receptive we've had in terms of, yes, no problem. We're happy to put you, on the docket and please come and do your presentation. Other councils actually have been, I don't know, much more, asking more questions, more curious, seem to be coming a little more from a defensive perspective, which really surprised us. So it seems to be a topic that there's some sensitivity around, which we're shocked about because it's not controversial at all. It's something that clearly there's a gap. But we have gone beyond Simcoe County now. I think we're covering every council. There's a couple councils who refused us, and I know that the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, I think that was a challenge. But we have gone beyond also local Simcoe County councils, and we are now actually doing presentations to a number of like Thunder Bay, and I think we're meeting with the Ottawa Council. So there's a number of other councils outside of Simcoe County that have also been open to us coming in and doing this presentation.
Okay, that's very helpful. My comment is, luckily we haven't had the problem here. I've heard about in other municipalities, from very small ones to larger ones, where, councillors are repeatedly, violent or harassing other members of council and staff. And the frustration is with the integrity commissioners, I know there is nothing that can be done. And I think that it's time that we have something in place so that there is a real penalty behind this kind of offensive behavior, whether you're in a council chambers or in a staff's office. There's no place for workplace violence or harassment. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamlin. Councillor Doherty?
Thank you. I can hardly add words to what has already been said. The degree to which I would support this council forwarding a motion. I'm also very curious. You just indicated that with AMO, it was a challenge, I think were your words. And I'm wondering if you might be able to elaborate on that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can only elaborate in terms of what I understand, because I'm not the one who's actually was in touch with them, but there was some resistance in terms of endorsing a letter. I think that was what it came down to. Obviously, I think they stated that they were in support of the bill, but there was some resistance in terms of I don't know if making that public. I don't want to make too many comments in terms of, not representing the information properly, but it was surprising to us. And I mean, any of the councils that said no to us, which were few and far between, I think there were only two, we were surprised at that too. Barrie was a bit challenging too. So, they've got some things going on in Barrie that, this all arose from, so it wasn't surprising.
Thank you. As it happens, I have an AMO board meeting this week. So with your permission, I'd like to maybe take a conversation offline. And I will go to the meeting armed with some additional information, and hopefully I might have an opportunity to begin to advance this with
That would be
AMO.
wonderful. Thank you. I would really appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Doherty. Is there anyone else that would like to offer a comment at this time? Yes, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Hall. So I totally agree with the principle of what is intended here, but I think similar to maybe some of the other comments that might have come up, I'm not familiar exactly what the wording of Bill 5 is and how it impacts, and I would like a better education on that. So going forward, in terms of endorsing the principle of what is trying to be achieved, great. But in terms of endorsing the actual wording of the bill, I'm really not in a position to do that. So I think the wording of what comes before us will hopefully be able to clarify the difference between those. Thank you.
Just looking at the calendar as it relates to now and the end of the term, we've got our meeting, I think it's the 19th of October. And is it the 19th, 18th? Sorry? 17, sure, one of those days. Pick a date. If somebody was to move something this evening, we could have something come back before us for consideration at that council meeting, where maybe a broader discussion point in terms of, what the intent. I think the intent is clear, but if there were questions to be specifically asked, they could. So, Councillor Carey, you're back.
Thank you. And I say this with respect to my colleagues. As a former mayor who had toothless legislation, I would be proud on behalf of this council to ask us to consider at our meeting on October 17th a motion of support for Bill 5.
So if there are no other questions specifically for perhaps our guest this evening, I will thank you for coming tonight and for making the presentation. And I'll turn it back to you, Councillor Carrier, if you would formally like to put something on the floor, and we'll take it away as a notice from tonight's meeting.
Thank you,
Thank
Worship.
you. Oh, sorry. I was
Go
just
ahead.
going to thank everyone for having us. It was a real pleasure, and thank you so much for the support. Really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Councillor Carrier.
Thank you, Worship. As we've learned through our Indigenous community members, through the truth and reconciliation discussions, that we can't begin to heal as a community unless we face the ugly truths. The ugly truth is that there's a history of this type of behavior at local level of government that is completely unacceptable. And I would be proud to request that the clerk present this council on October 17th with a motion in support of Bill 5.
Thank you. So we'll take that as a notice of motion from tonight's meeting, and we'll move it to the meeting on the 17th. Thank you. With that, we'll then take it to agenda item number 5. Under the consent agenda, we do have 2 items. The council herein received the general consent agenda, and further that the information and opinions provided in the general consent agenda items are that of the author and are not verified or approved as being correct. The 2 items would be item 5.1, A21- Walk for Freedom, and this is the Emily Jane A21 Walk for Freedom Collingwood, and there was a request for an endorsement letter. And then item 5.2, the Baker Tilly management letter. So if I could get a mover and seconder to put this on the table. I've got Councillor Madigan and I've got Councillor Jeffrey, and again, calling the question to receive these 2 items. All those in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Is there anyone that would like to pull one of the 2 items for direction or for discussion? Yes, sir. Councillor Carrier.
5.2.
5.2, floor is yours.
The letter from Baker Tilly does talk about the recommendation and management response into an observation and implication that's drafted in the letter. I'm just wondering if our Director of Treasury could elaborate a little more than the 2 or 3 sentences that we have.
It's a pleasure to have our treasurer in person tonight. So, Treasurer Quinlan.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Carrier. So we did get notified by this during the audit when our auditors were in. So it was a check that over the Christmas holidays had ended up remaining in the safe or in the lockbox at the pool. Unfortunately, it wasn't brought right away to Town Hall, which is the procedure that is in place. So we did speak to the staff just to discuss sort of holiday procedures. It hasn't happened in the past, and it was kind of a new thing that came up. So over the holidays, as things occur, if there is a situation like this again, we will be notified. So myself or Jennifer Graham, the manager of finance, and the check will be taken into Town Hall and locked into the safe. So that was a small thing to make a change, but really important that we do that. We've added some additional training just for those staff members that are there, just to understand, the way checks should be handled. And certainly they've kept in that form ever since. It was what we hope to be just a one-time thing at this point.
Great. Thank you, Worship.
Okay. Last call, 5.1, 5.2. That takes us then to item 6, which is our staff report. And I'll just ask our treasurer to come forward and make her presentation.
Okay, it's a pretty brief presentation, but I'll just give you an idea of what we're going to go through. Again, as the report discussed on the agenda tonight, this is a very preliminary status, a second report, just following up from the previous report we brought in September to give members of council and the public, for that matter, sort of an economic evaluation or indicators of what has occurred over the last several months. We are of course, going to provide tonight sort of a little snapshot of what our public survey resulted in, just the top 3 questions to cover here, and then some of the historical background on both CPI and the tax rates. And then we'll get into some of the larger operational requests that staff are currently reviewing, and we will be refining the budget, of course, after that. So next slide, please. So this is our tentative schedule. We've shown this all along, or I guess in the last 2 reports. It is still our hope, or staff's hope, that we will be able to meet prior to the end of the year to pass a formal budget. But we do understand that it is an election year and that the timing may have to be delayed. So we do have an alternative plan that will allow the budget approval to move into January. It's still just our hope that we can follow normal budget procedures. Next slide, please. So before I get into the results of the public survey, it was brought to our attention on Friday when the original report was published that email addresses and some phone numbers were inadvertently included in the Appendix A of the staff report. This personal information was gathered for the purpose of participating in a gift card draw, and it wasn't intended to be used for any other purpose. As soon as this matter was brought to our attention, and that was within less than 24 hours, the staff report was removed and updated to remove that information. We're only aware of one individual that reviewed this information and whom was the person that brought it to our attention, and we greatly appreciate that. We have adhered to the IPC office guidelines for managing these types of matters and providing appropriate notifications. The town of Collingwood, and most significantly myself, who made the mistake, sincerely apologizes for this error, and we've identified the steps to remediate and ensure that it doesn't happen in the future. So that, all that being said, we'll start to talk about the results of the public survey. So overall, we were down slightly over our responses last year, which was a little bit disappointing because we added the gift card hoping that we would get double. But it didn't work out that way. So we did get 340 responses. Last year, it was just over 400. And although the response level didn't provide a statistically significant survey, it certainly gives us some information to, sort of weigh and understand from a public perspective, and allows council and staff to review that as well. So one of the first questions we asked, and I think this is the same question we asked last year, and it's a really good question in my opinion, but was, given all the programs and services that are provided by the town, how would you rate or the value for service you received? And I'm happy to say that over 79% of the respondents believe that the values for service they received is fair and good, or fair to excellent, my apologies, with the rating of 10% for excellent and 43% for good. I think when I was at the farmers market for advertising the public survey and trying to hook people onto this participation in a draw and fill out the survey as well, I got actually a lot of really positive feedback. And I think sometimes, as staff, and I'm sure members of council as well, we feel like we're hearing the bad news more often than you hear the good news. I think overall, I was sort of astounded and pleased to hear how happy people were with the municipality. Lots of questions about the budget process itself, and sometimes, sort of not negative questions, but questions about, well, what do you guys do? Like, I never hear about the budget. So when I walked through sort of all the public engagement in the process, they were, sort of like, oh, okay, so you do say a lot about it, and maybe I'm just not paying attention. So one of the questions I asked them was, well, how do you get your news, and where would be the most appropriate place? And it was also included in the survey. And although the survey didn't show the same results, oftentimes what people were saying is from the radio, that they're listening to it on the radio. Getting to our website, of course, was one. So it was really interesting that we actually tried to promote the budget survey as much as possible through His Worship's radio spots throughout the weeks. But I thought it was just a good little piece of feedback. Anyhow, it was good information. Next slide, please. So one of the second question that we asked was what you feel or what the public feels is the most important issue facing the community. And we listed 12 and asked them to rank them. The number one item that came back, and I will say that all of these items were extremely closely ranked. So they weren't, they're only within about 0.2 or 0.3 of each other, and they were all quite high on the list. So the first one was provision of recreational facilities, which is quite different from last year. Last year, astoundingly, it was housing and climate change. And although they still show up here, they're a little bit lower than where they were last year. The property tax rates was number 2. And then number 3 was arts, culture, and heritage. So it was good feedback and understanding. I think one of the things that maybe I would change next year if we did this again is I would reword the wording housing and accommodations, because we did ask as a follow-up question if the item they felt was most important wasn't included in the list to provide us with what those items were, and affordable housing was attached to that, and homelessness support. So likely the wording wasn't appropriate. Although we did use the same wording last year, I think we should have changed it a wee bit. So at any rate, there were 4 others that came up quite often: affordable housing and homelessness support, specific roads or infrastructure projects. Although infrastructure was included, it was specific to the road or project that they felt was most important. Lots of advocacy for increasing tennis courts and having pickleball courts included in those. And finally, the environmental protection and sustainability was the 4th one. Next slide, please. So another question, and again, we talked about this last year, and very, very similar response to last year was how important the goals that we've set under the CBSP were considered important. And I would say, overall, the majority of the respondents felt that the goals that have been laid out by council were either very important or somewhat important. There were a few that gauged in the range of a little bit somewhat important, but overall, I would say the majority was definitely that the goals sort of hit the mark with the public as well. So that's great news. Next slide, please. So now we're going to get into a little bit of a background, just same information that we've shared both in September and again this reporting period. But we wanted to talk a little bit more, and we'll get into the next slide, of the CPI and historical tax rates over time. And you can see in these charts, so the top chart is the tax rate increase over from 2019 till 2022. And the bottom chart shows you that the impact on a median household. As you can see here, the tax rates have gone down over the last 4 years. So in total, the aggregate tax rate was a decrease of 2.17%. Now, the impact on the taxpayer, and I'm going to note one item, is that the median household changed in 2019 in comparison to 2020, means that the average taxpayer is paying about $6.68 more than what they were back in 2018. Now, I think most people would look at this and go, okay, well, why would there be a difference? You have a decrease in the overall tax rate, but you have an increase in the overall taxes that somebody pays. And the reality is that the fact that the household assessment or the median household assessment has changed. And although it's slightly, it does create an impact overall. I think one thing we need to keep in mind, those assessment values have not changed since 2020. And when I talk about assessment values, I don't mean the growth and if you've done renovations to your home or you've updated things, but in fact, just the phase-in values of the revaluation. So as most of you know, MPAC is planning on holding that off again for 2023 with the expectation that those rates will start to be looked at again for 2024. Next slide, please. I also wanted to give a little background on inflationary rates versus tax rate. And as I mentioned in the report, the inflation at August 2022 is at 6.9%. And obviously, since the pandemic has hit, there has been a significant change in the way CPI tracks. In the past, we would often just use, between 2 and 3%. But over the last couple of years, 2021 especially, and where we're at now for 2022, we're seeing it over 5%. I know, there's growing pressures when we look at inflation, and of course, it puts additional pressures on tax rates as well. The town has been and will continue to be very fortunate in what it sees in its growth pattern. On average, over the last several years, we've had about 2.5% growth. And I suspect we'll continue to see that in the future. But the fact remains that there is a big gap between what we see in terms of inflationary pressures and the way the tax rates have rolled out over the past several years. Next slide, please. So as part of this update, staff are defining some of the major operational requests that are currently being reviewed to form part of the 2023 budget. The items outlined in this report don't necessarily represent the total budget for 2023, but they're simply a component of the total draft budget that will be brought forward to council in November, or in next month, I should say. These amounts are partly offset by previous year's work, and one-time studies will be reduced, and staff will continue to review, where possible, how financial needs may be decreased through efficiencies and alternative solutions. These items were identified by first getting submissions from department heads and managers, which also included ties back to master plans or priorities within their own departments, as well as the community-based strategic plan. We, as a group, reviewed these items at a full-day department head and manager workshop, which I think was very successful this year. We got through a lot of information and gained a lot of knowledge about the individual requests and tried to make a priority list or prioritize each of the requests. So then, of course, the prioritization happened by managers and DHs, and then following that, there was some further refinement by the treasurer, me, and the CAO. Next slide, please. So even though we have these major requests, I think while the financial picture is becoming a lot more clear for 2023, I don't think it's fair to say that we can individually add these things up and say, yes, that total, that this would be what the 2023 budget will provide or will include as an increase. There's a significant amount of information that still needs to be gathered as we work our way through October. And I will say that in developing this list, staff was very careful to consider the type of request, including its link to driving us toward our vision through the goals in the community-based plan, or investments that will provide value for taxpayers' money, as well as continuous improvements for the public services as council has endorsed. So we're looking at the staffing requests right now. I won't go through each individual one as they're laid out in the report, but these, again, only capture what is greater than $20,000 and doesn't include any capital or as part of the capital plan. The capital plan will be reviewed as part of November and when we determine funding and sources along those with that. This list does capture the staffing requests at this time and are ranked as having a high level of importance from staff. And note that there are a couple of positions that we've noted in the report that are still under review as we do require some further information and refinement. But overall, we're looking at about 6.4 FTEs included in the first draft of the November 2023 report. Next slide, please. So this slide captures the major operational requests, again, greater than 20,000. and does include some of council resolutions, some of the items that were tied back as they came through 2022 and requested to be looked at or considered as part of the 2023 budget. I think the idea of sharing this information, again, is just to provide a context for the 2023 budget. We know that there's lots of work to be done, and work will continue to happen over the next few weeks as we gear up to present that first draft in November. But I do still think that it's important that staff provide the updates to members of council and to the members of public as well, as we establish how we're going to proceed through the rest of the year. And that, I believe, is the last slide.
Thank you, Treasurer Quinlan, for your presentation this afternoon. Before we table the report to be received and ask questions, I'll turn to our clerk. Clerk Almas, is there anyone online that would perhaps like to offer a comment or question this afternoon?
Thank you, Your Worship. We do have an attendee participating remotely. If the attendee wishes to address the Standing Committee regarding this staff report, please press the raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen. And there is no interest to address this report at this time, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone in attendance tonight that would like to perhaps offer a comment or question tonight? Before we table it then, as we're just receiving it, are there any questions for clarification? Yes.
Thank you, Treasurer Quinlan. Through the chair, so what you're suggesting at this point is 6.4 FTEs, full-time equivalents being added possibly in the 2023 budget. Could you clarify for me how many full-time equivalent positions we have at this time? My belief is that it's 248 in total for the entire corporation. Is that? Am I right with that number, please? Through the chair.
Through you, Your Worship, to Deputy Mayor McLeod, yes, that is correct. That today the FTE count is 248.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions of clarification? Yes, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. You note that in many cases, some of these items that you've identified here do have offsets. So it could be from the modernization fund, as an example, could be offset by parking revenues. So are these costs net of the offsets or before the offsets?
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Doherty, these are not net of the offsets, no. So these are full up the cost, so not the impact to the taxation.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to our treasurer. I'm disappointed, as I heard you say, at the number of people who responded to the survey of 340 out of, I'm guessing, 19,000 people of age. And I'm just wondering, have you thought about, or did you, because I didn't notice if you did, include information about doing a survey in the final tax bill that went out this year?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Hamlin. We have thought about it. The fact is that it's expensive to add as a cost, and we were trying to be environmentally conscious as well, to say, to add this survey. So there was a couple of respondents that asked, why isn't this mailed out to every constituent? So it's definitely something we need to think about, but we just thought that the cost can be so, it is expensive to do a mail out like that. And also just from a green sense, it seemed sort of counterintuitive. One thing we did think about was maybe in our final billing, including just like I can't think of the word right now, the little things that you scan.
Yeah, and QR code.
Yeah, there we go, a QR code to lead people directly to it. And maybe we're already including a letter and adding that, maybe that's the route to go, and that would encourage people to do so. The hard part is, we don't know if it will increase necessarily, but it's definitely maybe worth a shot for the 2024 budget.
Okay, thank you. And I have one more question.
Please.
I noticed that one of the potential additions to staff was a transit coordinator, and there was a reference to the on-demand transit system. So I was just wondering, I had in my mind that we might see the rollout of that on-demand transit system this fall. And now I'm wondering whether you could tell me, are we waiting to roll that out until an additional person is hired? Or you don't know that?
Worship.
No.
Oh, there we go. We have Director Slama here to help
Wonderful.
me with this one. So I'm gonna refer to Director Slama.
Please
Thank
do.
you.
Welcome, Director Slama.
Good evening, Your Worship, and good evening, Council. Through you to Councillor Hamlin. No, that's not the case, Councillor Hamlin. We are still anticipating the rollout of the on-demand platform for the transit system. This request for the transit coordinator is in line with the and I'm not going to think of the right word, I apologize, but the transit study that we completed, the optimization study, which did look at possibilities for options for expansion, and did recommend that there be more staff resources dedicated to transit to really monitor the contract and fulfill some of the future plans.
That's great. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jeffrey?
Thank you, Mayor Hall. So I guess my questions are more, there's going to be a lot of work to be done on this for sure. I'm just wondering about, I think about 3 years ago, I brought up the fact that the city of Fredericton was successful in reducing their budget by $5 million, specifically through staff-driven or ideas that they brought to council on how to save money. And I'm wondering if we have such an initiative going forward, or if we could think about an initiative, or if we have staff members already bringing ideas like that are saving us money, are we recognizing them and keeping it track? And if we are, I think council should know more about it. But I guess my question would be at budget time is, where can staff save us money to make room for the initiatives they're proposing, for sure, through you, Mr. Chair, to the Treasurer. And then another thing separate from that is, I know that the poor Treasurer always answers me, but it just frustrates me that we budget to last year's budget instead of budgeting to actuals and having an understanding of what that actual scenario was for us in the year. So those are just my observations for the budget process so far.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Jeffrey. So the first part about coming forward with cost saving, I think we've definitely, the continuous improvements that we've identified within the budget, both last year and prior to that as well, are areas where the expectation that costs will decrease. I don't know that we share, as much of the sort of the discussion and ingenuity that comes up, and likely we should. And that's really what the department head and manager workshop was about, was how do we, come up with ideas that make things better, but also, reduce costs as well. And in some cases, pair up or revamp the requests that they were, that have been brought forward. And I think this year we were quite successful in doing that, but we don't, I suppose, necessarily promote it as much as we should and explain how those things have come to that point. When it comes to the budget itself, and so we do kind of look at the previous year's budget, and when we do that, we start by saying, what of these things are sort of one-time requests or one-time items? And I'll use an example of a study or something along those lines. So we start with it and sort of deduct from there as well. So it's not just an automatic increase. And when we're looking at the budget, we're also looking at actual beside the budget as well to determine that it makes sense. Because, for example, if we had a particular item, and I think, we did quite a bit of this last year, and again, we probably didn't share as much as we could have, but when we looked at particular accounts and said, okay, but you're continuing to ask for the same amount and you've never actually spent that, it's going to get bumped down and we're going to reduce it to what actually occurs. If there's some contingency where there's, areas that people are in particular concern where things can change, we can deal with that, in a contingency line. And we have done that in the past. So I think, although I hear you that we do look at the previous year's budget, it's not the sole contributor to our information for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. CEO Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Jeffrey as well. She's hit on one of my favorite topics. I do think as well, I agree with you, the people who really know how to run the business well and know where to save money are often the people on the front lines doing it. And also, in addition to that, we've had, I think, some good success in figuring out ways to offset tax expenditures through the last couple of years through things like waterfront parking for non-residents. That's put some substantial funding into the parks themselves and to the bylaw enforcement and to the customer service. We did have a rethink of the new Tecumseth agreement and how we could harvest some of the benefits here in a modest way for us as a outside of the water program. We had some innovative staff ideas for the Zamboni and rink parking at the curling club when we weren't able to, we had some pretty high bids and we were able to figure out through the PRC leads how to do that for 100,000 or more less. And then there's some innovative things coming forward this year that may or may not get approved, but are some innovative thinking, things like indoor pool covers to decrease water use and chemical use and energy use. So we are really trying hard to figure out ways to shift things to away from taxes and to ways that still work for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. You have a follow-up or you're good? Okay. Were there any other questions, comments? My only comment, I greatly appreciate the presentation, the report, and I too was a little disappointed, as was Councillor Hamlin, perhaps in the number of people that responded, and perhaps we'd have a greater uptick in years to come. And I was a little surprised maybe in the ordering, but it's really, I mean, at the end of the day, I think you can, slice and dice opinions and sort of categorize them in any way you want. But I mean, the real issue is whether you're a resident of Collingwood or you're a resident of Montreal or Shaunavon, Saskatchewan, the issue is affordability. And whether it's housing, heating your home this year, or putting food on the table. And I think that that's going to translate down to how people think in terms of where they want to see their municipal resources wisely spent on their behalf. So I don't envy the task of our staff and our experts and the 9 that will be around the table who will carry this conversation onward, because it will be a difficult conversation this year in weighing priorities, but also weighing expectations as it relates to affordability. So with that, thank you very much. So I'll table it. It's the staff report is that staff report T 2022-13 2023 budget, preliminary status report number 2, major operating budget requests and budget survey results be received. Can I get a mover and seconder? Got Deputy Mayor McLeod and Councillor Doherty. Are there any final questions? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. Those in the affirmative. And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. That takes us then to our department updates, and we've got 2 tonight. The first being 7.1, our senior CAO Skinner, And then we've got Chief Thurman joining us as well. So CO Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship. This one is a difficult one because it is something that I feel very strongly is warranted, but one that I think Council will be watching very closely. I've taken a comprehensive review of the workload pressures for planning down to the 0.1 of a person and the things that are happening. And I want to advise Council that per your resolution on delegated authority during the lame duck period, I am going to use my delegated authority for financial decisions to start the hiring process for an additional senior planner position. So that's one of the 6.3 FTEs that you just saw in the budget. It was the number one ranked item. Right now we have 7.7 FTEs in planning. Which is down from previous years. They had at least 3 more some time ago, and I don't know the full story of what happened. Right now, we've got the director who spends what we've estimated to be 70% of her time on planning, a manager, 1 senior planner, 3 planners, a technician, and an administrative assistant. However, the planning matters in Collingwood, they're significant, they're complex. We've got our ICBL and our servicing. We're one of the fastest growing municipalities in all of Canada with mounting numbers of applications. And most of the easier development sites are used, and we have a number of master plans to take into account. We have significant policy and corporate projects coming up over the next several years, including the official plan, the MCR, the subsequent zoning bylaw, our grain terminals revitalization work, among other pressing items. And our environment is changing, and this is something that's going to make the competition for planners quite strong among many municipalities, in that in the recent provincial legislative changes, there will be financial penalties coming into effect in January of 2023, where municipalities have to refund application fees if development applications are not processed within the timelines of the Planning Act. We have the risk of appeals to OLT for non-decision, and of course, any that are go forward without the appropriate reviews and judgment will also likely be unsuccessful. We have been tracking overtime hours, and for the 2 senior folks within the department between January 1st to the middle of August, we're pushing towards 700 hours of overtime. So they're not; those are not paid overtime. That's just extra hours that very senior staff have worked to make sure that things go forward in a timely fashion, the best that we possibly can. And I alluded a little earlier that it's becoming very difficult to hire qualified and accredited planners. Even if we could pause, and I don't think we should, to post-budget, many municipalities may be hiring at that time, and it will decrease our opportunity to find qualified candidates in this very difficult market. Haven't done this lightly. I've done my due diligence in consulting with the clerk, the treasurer, and the executive director. The Director Valentine and the Acting Director Ayers are in full support, and the poll of department heads and managers indicated overwhelming support for this need as the top priority. It's an existing position, not a space, but the position name and the job description are well established. The pay rate is well established. The intention is to post internally and externally as soon as possible. We have some highly qualified internal candidates. So should one of them be successful, the backfill position of community planner would be filled, then be filled. That's unlikely to happen before the 2023 draft budget, so we would include the addition of planning resources for council's decision in that budget and be quite transparent about the funding. And so in summary, it's my intention to go forward with this position, and I very much think it is in the absolute best interest of the municipality and will avoid an equivalent or greater amount of other expenditures and concerns in future years if we take this step now. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO Skinner. Is there anyone around the table that would have a question? Yes, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor House. So through to the CAO, and I think she maybe alluded to it a little bit near the end there, but this would reduce, because I know that we have been incurring consultant costs to in terms of keeping up with the current staffing abilities. So will that be reduced by making this decision? And then my second part of that would be where the funds would be coming from if this position was hired before the end of our current year.
I'll start with the beginning of the first one. And ultimately, it would reduce consultant cost. Right now, we have a consultant on board to help us with our OLT preparations. And as we're considering if we need someone as part of the budget process to support the planning pieces of the grain terminals revitalization. So in the longer term, having the appropriate staff in-house we wouldn't need those immediately. I don't think it'll change those consulting costs for this fall and maybe the first 6 months or so of next year, because by the time we need to get the people on board and then have them trained and understanding the work. But the general answer is yes. With respect to where the funds will come from, it'll take us a bit to get that person on board. If it is a backfill, there'll be likely no funds needed additionally within 2022. If it's not a backfill, then there will be a month or so of those funds that we would require in 2022 prior to a budget decision. And from the treasurer's perspective, I think we'll be able to manage that, but I'll let her talk to that directly, please.
Your worship, and thank you, CAO Skinner. So there are some funds. We did have some delay at the beginning of this year as well. So there is a bit of a favorable variance sitting in the planning budget in terms of hiring a manager and moving that the replacement to a planner. So there are a little bit of funds there, as well as we do have a salary contingency that was budgeted as part of the compensation review that was completed last year. So there is a small amount that's available for funding there as well. So
Follow up? Or?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone else? I see a couple. I'm going to go Deputy Mayor and then Councillor Carrier.
Thank you, and through the chair to the CAO, good luck. As far as I understand it, from my friends who are councillors in other municipalities and the people I know at the Grey Sauble Conservation Authority and the Lake Simcoe Conservation Authority and even at the Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority, that planners aren't exactly thick on the ground these days. And so I guess one of the good news pieces is that we have such a wonderful community that somebody might be lured here, and we'll wish you good luck on that search.
Councillor Carrier.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to the Director of Finance. My recollection is that planning is largely funded through planning applications and not through taxation. Is that still correct?
Treasurer Quinlan.
thank you, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Carrier. There are planning fees associated with the budget, but planning overall is for the most part, the majority is through taxation.
CAO Skinner.
I would just add through you to Councillor Carrier as well. There is a project that is out for, it was in this year's budget that's out, I believe, for bidding at this time for a consultant, and it's a fees and services review for development. So that will be a resetting of that, how much of the cost for planning and the associated building and engineering work is paid through the fees of applicants versus taxes, and how we can streamline those processes.
Thank you.
Yep. Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank our CAO for her attention to this, as particularly when she described the 700 hours of overtime for 2 senior staff. So far this year, I did a quick calculation and decided it was an hour and a half a day for each of them. So that is a lot of overtime 5 days a week. And also, given the complex development projects that are coming into our town and that are on our books, they all have top-level planners who we need to be matching our level with them. So I so appreciate you bringing forward this initiative. Thank you.
Are there any other questions specific to this particular item? Okay, so that takes us to the next, which is 7.2, and this is Chief Thurman. And do we have Chief Thurman with us? Fantastic. And I understand, CAO Skinner, that Chief Thurman is making a request tonight for Collingwood's first helicopter as part of our aerial fleet. Is that correct?
I would think that Chief Parr didn't get a helicopter, so maybe Chief Thurman would
Sure.
like to also try.
Okay. Welcome, Chief Thurman. Floor is yours, sir. Can you hear us? We can't hear you. There we are, sir. Okay. You can hear me, Chief Thurman? Okay. The floor is yours, sir. Welcome. In that case, his request for helicopters denied. Getting the 1 minute signal.
I'm wondering if at the bottom of your screen there, Chief Thurman, where it says mute, if you click on it and there's a microphone setting, if you make sure that it's set to your computer. Do you see the small arrow button by the mute button?
I'm just trying to see if I can connect remote.
So I have sent Chief Thurman a call-in number if you'd like to phone in with your telephone. Through to your worship, it doesn't appear to be working.
Thank you, Clerk Almas. If I may, and if it would be, I don't think it would be out of line, but I would take it one step further to support Fire Prevention Week. I think, given what we've seen tragically south of the border and out east in our own country and with fires out west, that it's not just Fire Prevention Week, it is emergency preparedness. And I would certainly, on behalf of our emergency services, encourage residents to make sure that they are prepared, that they do have things not only within their home as it relates to extinguishers and carbon monoxide detectors and fire detectors for that purpose, but they have things like water supply, emergency supplies for a short duration of time. I think I stand to be corrected, but we are at 10 after 6, and there are still residents within Prince Edward Island that don't have power today. So things do happen, unfortunately and tragically. And, I think that, and I don't say this lightly when I say, it's not a case of if or when, and therefore we do need to be prepared as residents of Collingwood. Anyone else have maybe a question or comment that they'd like to table, even if it can't necessarily be responded to? Okay. Why don't we move on then to item 8, other business. Did anyone from around the table have any other business tonight? Yes, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Hull. So my question is, we used to have an emergency fund where we could send funds to another municipality or another area of emergency within Canada in our budget, and I believe we have sent $1,000 through that from time to time in at least past terms of council that I've been on. So I guess through to our treasurer, if number one, if we still have that fund, I might have a notice of motion for October 17th to send something through the Red Cross to the East Coast.
Okay, so maybe we could have the first part answered. I do recall that in the past that has been done, but not sure if that fund still exists. So.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Jeffrey. We do, within the grants budget, have a small amount there available for those types of emergencies, so certainly in the budget.
All right, so is it appropriate now then I would just
Please
give
do.
notice of motion that the town of Collingwood send or contribute to the Red Cross specific to the East Coast recovery of $1,000?
Okay, so that'll be your notice.
Yep.
And that's October the 17th, correct? Okay. And we'll bring that back for consideration at that point. Thank you. Anyone else with other business tonight? Okay, that takes us to item 9 on the agenda, which is public delegations. And if there is anyone within the audience or online that would like to speak to an item that was on the agenda tonight, outside of the staff report that was already presented, please feel free to come forward. Or Clerk Almas, do we have anyone online?
Thank you, Your Worship. We do have one individual still. If you wish to address the standing committee, please press the raise your hand button. I believe the attendee is just observing this evening.
Great, okay. Okay. Mr. Pryor, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Helen and members of council and staff. I recognize the earlier staff report in the budget was only received for information and its close rankings, but something Mayor Hell said, I thought maybe I was the only one who was surprised by the ordering. And something came to mind because of that. I wasn't able to get on my tablet to look at the report, so I'm going on memory here, and I apologize for that. But I was going to ask if I could, just for a clarification, through you to the treasurer, the number 2 slide that you showed that was the rankings, is that based on the number 5 question in the body of the survey?
Go ahead, Treasurer Quinlan.
Don't actually have the number of the question, but I can pull it up just if you just give me a moment.
And again, I would have had the page number, but as I said, I couldn't get the tablet to bring up the report.
So if I may, Your Worship, through
Please.
you to Mr. Fryer, are you asking what number question the second question in the presentation was from on the survey?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So just give me a quick second here.
I think it's number 5, and
It is in fact number 5.
so through you, if I could, Mayor Hall, to the treasurer, are those percentages then?
If I may, Your Worship, through you to Mr. Fryer, they aren't percentages. We asked people to rank them, and they got so for example, the first one had the total number, the highest number of number 1 rankings.
Okay, so I believe it was 5.4 down to about 7.6, I think, in total numbers there.
Sorry, I don't have that part of the report up, but sure, okay. Sorry, yes, yeah.
Oh, perfect. If you've got that, that's perfect. So it says that there was rankings, and the number 1 is the most important. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So is that the average of what the rankings were for housing is 5.4?
I think you're right. So we may have made a mistake and reversed the order.
Okay, that's the clarification I was wondering about.
We'll
as I
correct
said,
that.
I didn't have my tablet open, and it wasn't until Mayor Hall mentioned about being surprised by the ordering that's when it kind of tweaked to me. I thought, oh, what about those last ones? So, and the rankings were all close, but I know that I feel like housing is the first one in my mind. So I appreciate, that's all I was looking for, was just clarification on that. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Fryer. Anyone else with a question, comment from tonight? Okay. So with that, that takes us to our adjournment, and I'll look to Councillor Jeffrey. All those in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good evening.